Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me again on this day in Canadian military history for a live stream. This one's going to be a little different. So today, it's just going to be me. So I hope that's okay with everybody. We're going to be talking about a book that I really did enjoy. I'll say that right up front. So it's called For Who Dared: Inspiring Stories of Canadian Airmen in the Second World War by Kenneth Cothliff. You can see it here. Pretty cool art cover design, and talk about the picture on the front there in a little bit because it's part of the story. But anyway, so I enjoyed this book a lot. Like I said, it's a little different, a little outside my wheelhouse in a little bit. But again, growing what I know, and this book helped a lot. So this one covers four airmen, Canadian airmen, during the Second World War, who fought with the RCAF as part of Bomber Command. There's four of them. Like I just said, they cover pilot Steve Puskis, pilot Reg Lane, gunner Jim Moffatt, and air engineer Bill Scotty Gracie, who is actually the author's father. And we'll get to that in a little bit, but that's a really interesting part of all of this. So if you are interested in this book, which I, again, highly recommend from Heritage House Publishing, the links are in the description below of where you can purchase it. In Canada, the United States, and in the UK. It has a different title, but it's the same book. So you can check that out below. I've also linked the Heritage House's social media and their website down below. Their other publications are like this one. I think they got some good stuff going on, so check them out. And with that said, thank you to Heritage House for giving me the book to review and talk about here. They didn't tell me what to say or what not to say. They just sent me the book, told me to enjoy it. So everything I say is my own opinion, not reflective of anybody else, just me. Let's get into it. So I'm going to do this as it's organized by Cothliff. It's done by individual in kind of a different order, looking at their different stories. So the first one I mentioned is Steve Puskis. It's a really interesting story that'll follow what I'll call the more traditional story of Canadians in Bomber Command, or within the RCAF, generally speaking. He's trained as a pilot, goes through the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan, which is covered very well in the Puskis section, kind of talking about the experiences that they had moving through the different levels as the system was designed throughout Canada. He's all over the place. He's in St. Catharines at one point. And again, one other thing I think is really good about this book is the storytelling, which is great. At some points, I got so engrossed in it, I forgot to take notes. I think that bodes really well for the story. But also just kind of the different anecdotes that fit into the story and the different interesting things to be learned that can come from these different men's experiences. So the one that really stuck out to me in the story, I've heard other sources and from other people, is while Puskis was in St. Catharines at one of the schools, another fellow pilot student flew a Tiger Moth plane under the Rainbow Bridge along the Niagara River, which, if any of you know that area at all, it's a very tight space, very dangerous. I mean, that pilot was reprimanded and they were phased out from being a pilot for doing such a dangerous thing. But I think that's just kind of indicative of kind of the stories that are brought forward in this book. Like, obviously it wasn't Puskis who did that, but it's there in his time, and it kind of gives you an idea of what these pilots and these young men, and they're all very young, were like. They all had very interesting backgrounds, stories. Puskis is the son of immigrants from Czechoslovakia at the time. So it's very interesting kind of how these things come up and how these different individuals get involved. So he ends up training to fly Halifaxes, which are a hugely important part of this story. They factor into four of the stories. Halifax is an important bomber for the Royal Canadian Air Force during the Second World War, and for Bomber Command, generally speaking. And it has an important place in the story. So it's something to keep in mind as well. And there's some good technical details covered in it as well to kind of give you an idea of what it would have been like to fly on one of these things. And some of the stories are just harrowing, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So Puskis himself flew with number 429, known as the Bison Squadron of the RCAF, which was part of number 6 Bomber Command Group, which was a different group set up later on in the war that was put in place because of Mackenzie King, Prime Minister Mackenzie King, wanting to have kind of a independent Canadian group to kind of have to show that Canada was really doing something on its own, so to speak, for the war effort. So there's a whole bunch of politics behind that. It's not really covered in this book because that's not what this book's goal is. But it's just interesting how that Cothliff is able to weave in these kinds of stories and these sorts of things. It's really a good book to like, hey, that's a really cool thing. Doesn't really mention this here, but it's like, hey, maybe I want to learn more about that, or that's not something I'd ever thought about before. And it kind of can branch you off into different areas. So I think that's really, really an important part of this book. So lots of technical details, like I said, covered in this, which is really, really interesting. Some I put on social media a while back. One thing that did stick out to me, and I did not know this, is one of the planes that was recovered that had crashed was used, the aluminum from it, or aluminium to our British friends, was used to build the roof of the Bomber Command Memorial in London in the UK. I just think that's really interesting. That, again, it's another piece that this book kind of brings in and weaves in. So an important part of this book as well, that's kind of an overall trend for most of these airmen, is the campaign prior to the Normandy landings. So bombing, infrastructure, and all that good stuff in France in the lead up. So that's a big part of all of this. It's obviously a big part of the Allied war effort in Western Europe. So this is part and parcel of it. So it talks about this, what the bombing runs were trying to do, what they were trying to accomplish with the different types of bombing and the different locations. And logistics is a big part of this. And I think overall it does a very good job of helping the Allied effort in Normandy. So Cothliff does a really, really good job of talking about this, and explaining it very well in detail about what's going on. And again, this is talked about time and time again, but this is just a different way to talk about it. Also part of Puskis' story, which probably doesn't get as much attention as the other elements of Bomber Command or the lead up to Overlord, or in the period after the landings had already taken place, and is well known, I think, amongst academic circles, but maybe not so much elsewhere, is Operation Crossbow, which was the targeting of the V1 and V2 sites. So those are pilotless bombs, rockets fired at Britain and later on into the Netherlands after the liberation, to kind of an attempt to kind of scare, again, like the same thing that was used during the Blitz, kind of a tactic to try to scare the Allied nations into saying that the German power is still strong and they can stop them. So that's a big part of Puskis' story. He goes on numerous raids as part of Operation Crossbow, which I think is interesting because, again, it doesn't really get talked about too much with Bomber Command and in more popular type books, which is really interesting to me because it's good to see that. And I think it's an important part that doesn't get discussed very much. One part of the book in Puskis' story that I find interesting is the mentioning of the bombings involved with Operation Tractable in Normandy. Puskis took part in the support bombings that were taking place as 1st Canadian Army pushed towards Falaise. It is mentioned in there that some of the bombs fell short and caused casualties amongst the Canadians and the Poles attached to the 1st Canadian Army. But it's not mentioned in the book that this is Operation Tractable. The date is given and all the information is given. And again, I'm not saying there's any cover-up or anything here. I just think it could have been better if that was just outright stated. Mistakes get made in war. Was Puskis involved directly? I don't know. I don't think we'll ever know. It's hard to tell. And we can kind of talk about inaccuracy of bombing shortly. But it's part of the story that just felt quite odd to me. It's not a drawback or real criticism or anything. I just think just say what it is. Because Operation Tractable is very well known, especially if you have, say, non-Air Force-minded type people. Might help them kind of understand what's going on better. So So that's just an interesting part of this. Puskis survives the war, serves in the RCAF after as well, has quite a distinguished career in peacetime, and then passes away in 2000. But also the author, and this is a good place to talk about this, has all kinds of documentation, spoke to some of these individuals, family members, all that kind of good stuff. So I think the detail behind this book is excellent. The research and all that good stuff. I think it's really, really good in that perspective. That he was able to talk to a good chunk of these people and those who knew them. So the next figure is probably to me, as a more army-focused land operations kind of person, which has been my background, is Jim Moffatt. So he was flying as part of number 427 Squadron, the Lion Squadron, and on a bombing run towards Nuremberg, in March, he is shot down. His plane is shot down near the Belgian-Luxembourg border. And he bails out. He survives the crash after bailing out. And his story is really, really interesting because it's titled in the chapter, it's called Evader. He evades Germans for a long, long time, months and months and months and months, for a very long time. So sorry, this is March 44. So for months. He's helped by numerous civilians in the areas. He's all over the place, moving around a lot. There's tons of near misses where he's almost captured multiple times. He's shot at on more than one occasion, trying to escape. He's almost hit, almost wounded as a result. It's really interesting. I don't want to give off too much about this part because I just think it's a really cool part about the book. And I wrote a note to myself, if this could be a book on its own. It's that good. It's that engaging. This is the part where I forgot to take a good chunk of notes and had to go back and reread a good chunk of it because I was just so engrossed in this story of this airman not really trained in any of this area, other than a little bit of escape and evasion training or even lectures on it, not very much, being successful. I mean, he's never captured by the Germans. His story goes on to become part of a member of the Maquis, the French resistance. And he's also officially made a member of the French forces of the interior at one point because he's still fighting with them. He mentions, and this is the only part I will talk about, is a ambush. They get some intelligence about a group of Germans in a nearby town, and they go to set up an ambush, and they're quickly outnumbered, and it goes very wrong very quickly. Good chunk of the men he was fighting with are killed. He gets away again. And this goes on for a while. They're still, again, escape and evasion, a lot of that going on until he eventually wanders his way into the American lines in the area. And this is before the Battle of the Bulge. So this is before the winter, before it all that happens. So he's with them for quite a while and then eventually gets back to Britain and then back home. So he survives the war, also is a member of the RCAF afterwards. Sorry, no, he's not. If I'm remembering correctly, I don't think he is. No, he was not. Sorry, but he's involved. Yeah, he's demobbed after, and then goes into university. So he has a civilian career, and then becomes involved in memorialization and things of that nature. Way on later, and as the publication of this book and some more kind of quick research I was able to do, Jim Moffatt is still alive, which was amazing. I mean, everything he went through. Part of his experience in escape and evasion was malnutrition. He was severely severe malnutrition numerous times, and he still survives even that difficulty and all this kind of stuff. So it's really, really interesting. So yeah, he's still alive as far as I know. But again, that part of the story is really, really interesting. Worth a close read. A really, really cool part. To seeing all these different dynamics that you don't normally get to hear about with the Canadian story, because it's not until Normandy, right, until the Canadians get on the ground. But there were Canadians, obviously, that were shot down, POWs, all that kind of stuff. And this is a really interesting one because he's an evader and joins other forces. It's really worth the read just for this part alone. So again, books in the description for different areas you can get it. I highly suggest it. It's a great book. The next story in succession is pilot Reg Lane. His is a really interesting story. So he is an early member of the RCAF as a pilot. So he has a regular tour as part of a regular bombing squadron early on in the war. So as I mentioned a few minutes ago, there's a lot of difficulty with accuracy of bombing from Bomber Command. All kinds of issues, lots of controversy around that. It's not what I'm here to talk about today, but as part of Lane's story, because after his first tour, he joins a Pathfinder group. So what a Pathfinder group does is it marks the targets. And this is done in different ways, depending on the time of the war and what they're trying to do. Mostly through the use of flares and marking materials. And then another one will follow up and say drop bombs to also mark a target. So he does that and he gets quite good at it. He's very well known for this. It's really, really an interesting part because there's lots of controversy around with what Bomber Command did during the war. The morality questions of bombing cities, high-level night bombing is very inaccurate, increases in accuracy as the war goes on, which, again, Cothliff does a very good job talking about all these different technical areas, technical advancements. Definitely worth, that part of the story is definitely worth paying attention to because he weaves it in, again, like I said, with all these other parts. It's weaved in. It doesn't break up the story. It's part of the story. So that, to me, is huge. Getting these things to blend is very difficult. And I think Cothliff does a very good job with that. Another part of the Lane story that's really interesting and is very well known, but I would say popularly not as much, is the German night fighters and what they were doing to Bomber Command, causing high numbers of casualties. And Lane, and I don't want to ruin it, but there's a section in the Lane part describing what it's like trying to fight off a night fighter and what that's like. I mean, it takes a lot of cooperation amongst the crew members to do so, and it's a very harrowing part of this book. And that's definitely another part of this that I didn't know as much about. So it was great to learn that that's what it took. It took an element of cooperation between the tail gunner or whoever. Again, it talks about this multiple times, but in the Lane section especially, of what that means and what that has to do. Like, right, you literally got to tell the pilot when to turn, where the fighter's coming from, what's the best way to do it, what are they about to do, what are we about to do, what are we trying to get to, all that good stuff. It's really, really interesting to learn that it took this level of cooperation within a bomber just to get it done. So also, sorry, coming back to an earlier part, talking about, again, the formation of Number 6 Bomber Group, RCAF. It's weaved in very well into this part as well. It's talking about the bigger issues of the war, of the Canada's war, right? Getting an independent force, keeping independent divisions, an independent navy, all that good stuff that they've tried to do that Mackenzie King had a priority for during the war. It's included again. It's done very, very well. That part is done very, very well. It's very difficult to do this without getting bogged down into politics and, personal relationships between politicians. Because again, that's not what this book is about. Maybe again, with someone with my level of knowledge, this stuff is not necessarily taken for granted, but well understood. But I still think, even for someone who's just a general interest in this, is going to learn about all of that good stuff. So another really part I think is really an interesting part of Lane's story. He's so well known and has such a good reputation within the RCAF and as a Pathfinder. He kind of does 3 tours, which is amazing. I mean, most do 1 and then they go on to something else within the RCAF, usually training or ground rule, something like that. Not Lane, he does 3 tours, but in between the second and the third tour, he's tasked with bringing the first Canadian-built Lancaster, which was nicknamed the Ruhr Express because of the bombing of the Ruhr Valley, which is the industrial heartland of Germany during the war. To Britain. So the first Canadian one, he mentions it's all kinds of problems. They got the factory had lots of, it was in Malton, so Toronto area, lots of technical problems. It wasn't really ready, but it was set for a deadline, so they wanted to make it look ready. Again, there's politics and optics behind all of that. But again, he mentions this is full of problems, and it eventually does serve fairly well as far as Cothliff makes it sound, but it eventually does crash and is destroyed during the war. But it's just a really interesting part, again, how these stories weave together, what these men did and didn't do. Like, this is a really interesting part because he's crossing the Atlantic and visiting family during the war, between tours and all that stuff. So again, it's really a good job showing that human element, that individual element of all of this. It's really, really interesting, and a part I really enjoyed. So the last section is good as well in its own different ways. So the last one is the author's father, birth father, Bill Scotty, because he was born in Scotland and moved to Canada when he was young, Gracie. So this is Cothliff's birth father. His story is really interesting. Of course, it's very sad because, I think it's literally page 1. Cothliff mentions his father is killed during the war. He dies in August 44, I think a week after Cothliff's birth, which is, again, incredibly sad, but also a very common, unfortunately, story of the Second World War. Tons of children never meeting their fathers' mothers. It's incredibly heartbreaking. But Cothliff's story is not all sad. We'll get to that in a second. But this story is really cool because he talks about how he met his father's family, who he did not know until he was much older, and how he meets his grandmother, who didn't even know that her son, that she had a grandson, that her son had a son during the war, because Cothliff's birth mother, gave him up for adoption. And then apparently as well, he doesn't talk about this as much. He meets his mother as well, his birth mother, later on in life, which again to me is a good story. It's great to see families reunited and all the different forms that families can take. That's a really good part of this book and kind of a heartwarming element. Gracie's a flight engineer. There's not much because obviously he's the one person that Cothliff couldn't get to meet, obviously, and had to rely on sources from others and all that good stuff. So it's all pieced together from family members' stories, other people he met, people that served with his father, and all that good stuff. So I don't want to say too much about that section because I can't write Cothliff's. I can't even describe Cothliff's story as well as he can write it. That's another one that I think is part of this. Brings to light what happens in war. Families are created and torn apart by war. New families are created by war. He speaks so highly of his adoptive parents and the life they gave him. But it's also good to know that he was able to meet, his biological family as well. That's great. And also it's through this family connection and through a connection through his wife, he's able to meet all these different individuals and piece these stories together. Stories that don't really have any connection other than that they're RCAF men during the Second World War, and kind of weaving them together, which I think he does very, very well. That's a big plus for me with this book, which I really enjoyed. I was to be honest, a bit skeptical about it. I guess that's my academic background and all that entails, and all the bias and everything, all that bad stuff that can come along with that. But it worked out really, really well, and I highly suggest it. It's a great way to read through it, a great way to understand it, a great way to see a new perspective on war, especially Canada's war. I mean, there's tons of stuff on Bomber Command, but this is a little different, and it's something I highly recommend. So kind of as book reviews go, there's always some sort of recommendation of who it could be done for or targeted for the audience. So to me, this book is great for a military history enthusiast, Canadian history enthusiast. You don't need a ton of knowledge to understand what's going on here. Like I've said multiple times, Cothliff is good at weaving in these big pieces, like Canadian politics during the war and what that means, whether it be talking about a bomber group or the building of a Lancaster, and weaving it into an individual story. That can be done. That's very difficult to do with biography, and this is very well done. So if you don't know a ton, I still suggest you read it. It's a good book for that, because it just brings it to you in an accessible way. It's also good for the military history enthusiast. Even if you're not necessarily particularly interested all that much in Canada's war, there's talk about Britain in this a lot because that's where Bomber Command is based out of for the entire conflict. So it gives some insights into what British life was like at the time and all that good stuff. So it's got something, I kind of think, for everyone who's interested in sort of in the Western Allies portion of the war. If you're really interested in that behind the scenes SOE kind of stuff. Behind the lines, SOE, secret agents, all that fun espionage kind of thing. There's an element there as well. So it's highly recommended for that. If you're interested in this stuff, check it out. Again, I can't say that more than enough. One thing I do caution with this book, and again, I can't help myself just finishing a PhD and being in the academic world for so long, is it's not the best academic source. And again, I'm not saying this because the book is bad, because I disagree. I wouldn't say I would disagree with anyone who says this book is bad. The only thing is this issue with this book that I have from an academic perspective is the lack of footnotes. Which is huge in the academic world, right? That's how you source things. That's how you understand things. This is how you verify things. I'm not accusing Cothliff whatsoever, unequivocally whatsoever, of plagiarism, making any of this up. I'm not, because it's expertly sourced. The sources he uses, the secondary ones, are excellent, which are mentioned in here. There is a biography of that. Bibliography with that element. It's just the primary sources. He does mention, like, so-and-so gave me the letters, so-and-so gave me this, diary, or I found the logbook. All that kind of stuff. It's just not written down. So I'm not saying it's not sourced. It's just not done in an academic traditional way. And I know a lot of academics get their back up if everything is not done perfectly to a T. So if you are, like, say, looking at, if you find this title of this book through YouTube or online or whatever, you're like, ooh, can I just watch this video? And what does this person have to say for academics? Just be careful. That is one thing I want to say. But I'm not saying don't buy it still. You can still read it if you're wanting an entry, text, and you're not too sure how this all fits together. This is still a good way to do it. I think it's a good way of going about it. And it's really, really interesting. That's just my kind of the disclaimer, but still you should get it and read it closely, because it's amazing. And one part I did want to mention outright is there's some good photograph sections in here. I'll just show it really quickly, because again, I don't want to give it away. But there's a good chunk of photos of all of the individuals, all the 4 main individuals in this. Like, it's really interesting that he was able to piece that together. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I say I'm not disbelieving these sources, because he has these photos. And these are not well-known men by any means, right? Like, at the time, a few of them were, but afterwards, and 70 plus years later, not so much. So to be able to piece all this together and get all these sources and all these photos is amazing. Like, I know how difficult it is to do these kinds of things, but to get, like, like, even here, there's a map that was drawn by one of the resistance groups where his father was initially buried after the crash landing that killed him. Like, I mean, that's amazing. Like, how often do you see that? You don't get these sorts of sources. Like, he's put so much, Cothliff has put so much time into putting this together. Like, here's the picture of the Ruhr Express that's on the cover, like I said, I talk about, with Reg Lane in it. Or is he not in it? Yeah, no, he's in there, which is so cool, right? Because it was like a big ceremony at the factory. Anyway, so, like, it's really cool, and that's why I think it holds up. It's just, again, it's just sometimes academics get their backs up with all these kinds of things. So that's just a kind of a heads up. But for the casual reader, the more, enthusiast, or whatever you want to call yourself, it's good for all levels. I recommend it. Again, it's in the links below where to purchase it. If you do buy through that, it helps me out, which is good, because I get a little bit of commission from each book sold, and which helps me continue to do this kind of work, which I need your help to do. I can't do this without a bunch of help. So also, with that said, if you like the work I do, say with the YouTube channel, or if you follow me on social media and are here because of that, you can follow me on Patreon. You get lots of benefits, lots of behind the scenes things, polls, what I'm going to do next, all that kind of fun stuff. If you can support me through that, it's greatly appreciated. And the easiest and best way you can support me, easiest and best for you, is just like the videos. Any video I put out, please help. Just like it, and please follow and subscribe. As many subscribers as I can get is very helpful. It really, really helps me to kind of build up the brand. The more people that see the videos, the more that subscribe, the more people that will keep seeing them. And this kind of builds. It's like a snowball, as I keep saying. And I need your help to get that snowball still moving. It still needs momentum. It still needs help. I'm still less than 1,000 subscribers. So I need to hit that mark to really make some differences. So if you can really, really help me, that'd be greatly appreciated. So with that said, thanks for listening. I really enjoyed this book. I really enjoyed talking about this book. As I'm sure you know, I like talking about books basically till the cows come home. But this one was kind of different, really helping me understand some things about Bomber Command that I had not understood very well. So very appreciative again to Heritage House for sending me this book. There's some plans for them to send me another one, which is coming out shortly, I think, now that we're mid-September. So yeah, that'll be great. It'll be the same sort of thing. I will talk about that one once I get it and get through it. But again, any questions, anything, any comments, leave them below. Any other books you might want me to review, please leave a comment, and I can do so. I can look at academic books, popular books, give you my opinion, my thoughts behind it. If that's something you're interested, please let me know. Again, that helps out a lot. Just kind of comments, so I can kind of know what you want to see. So thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you next time.